Chapter 81. A Dilemma. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 81. A Dilemma. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. The Empress and Hua Qiyun didn't know what Lin Ran was thinking. When they heard this place, they couldn't help but look puzzled. Hua Qiyun asked, "The nameless cave at the top of Mount Sword. Isn't that where Grandpa Sword God cultivated in seclusion? Could this be Grandpa Sword God's aura?" Lin Ran instantly thought of an excuse. "This is not Senior Sword God's aura, but the aura of a sword." With that, he took out the yin-yang sword from the Divine Sword Technique Manual. Looking at the black and white dual-colored sword, the Empress and Hua Qiyun couldn't help but look surprised. Hua Qiyun sensed the sword carefully and said in surprise, "This sword is really strange. On one side, it's filled with evil aura, and on the other side, it's filled with good aura. It's often said that good and evil can't coexist, but that's not the case with this sword. Mount Sword has a sealed demon and is guarded by Sword God, so there is a constant presence of both good and evil auras all year round. This sword happens to be located on a spot where two auras collide. After years of corrosion, this strange phenomenon appeared." As Lin Ran spoke, he performed a sword technique. Then, a yin-yang pattern spread out from the sword. The black and white colors formed a circle and slowly rotated. After a moment, black fog began to flow out of the man's 7 orifices and slowly fused into the spinning yin-yang pattern. When there was no more black fog flowing out, Lin Ran stopped and put the yin-yang sword back into the Divine Sword Technique Manual. "Alright, I've broken the restriction in his body. You can continue interrogating him." Hua Qiyun nodded and took out the small porcelain bottle. He shook it under the man's nose. Almost at the same time, the man slowly opened his eyes. Seeing the bloody scene in front of him, the man was first stunned before quickly crawling up to Lin Ran on all fours. "Sword God, please spare me. I was really deceived." Lin Ran ignored his begging and asked directly, "Did you eavesdrop on Lu Yuntao and Supreme Mo's conversation?" "Sword God, please spare me. I really don't know who Supreme Mo is." The man denied it, but Lin Ran clearly noticed that when he heard Supreme Mo, there was a subtle expression on his face. At the side, Hua Qiyun said, "Don't worry, the restriction in your body has been removed by Grandpa Sword God. Tell us the truth, and you'll be fine." Hearing this, the man suddenly stopped crying and stood up to look at Hua Qiyun with hatred. "Do you think I'm a 3-year-old child? The restrictions Supreme Mo casts are indestructible. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't be so afraid of him." Hua Qiyun frowned. He suddenly suspected if Lin Ran had really removed the restriction. Although there was black fog flowing out of this person's 7 orifices just now, who knew if it was a trick Lin Ran played to fool people? If the restriction was not removed, this person would definitely explode and die if they continued to interrogate him. Thinking of this, Hua Qiyun became even more suspicious. Just as he was about to ask, the Empress suddenly took out her sword and placed it on the man's neck. "If you don't tell us, you'll certainly die. But if you do, you might live." The Empress's cold voice sounded. Although the man didn't know Lin Ran's face, he could feel the killing intent and the dignity of an emperor. Involuntarily, the man's aura weakened. He stammered, I'll tell you. I'll tell you everything." As soon as he said that, the man broke out in a cold sweat. Hua Qiyun hurriedly pulled the Empress away because according to his previous experience, as long as this person had the intention to betray Supreme Mo, he would instantly explode and die. However, after waiting for half a minute, nothing happened to the man at all. Only then did they believe that the restriction in his body had really been removed. Lin Ran made an expression that said, "I told you so." Then, he looked at the man and asked, "Do you believe me now? Then tell me quickly. Who is Supreme Mo? He's not human," the man said hesitantly. After realizing that he really did not explode and die, he became bolder. Actually, I'm not sure if he's human or not. I already told you about our trip to the 8-directional mountain last night. Lu Yuntao said that the sword god coming out of seclusion might be a scam, so he wants to rope us in to challenge the new emperor. I agreed at that time, but I felt that something was wrong, so after the meeting ended, I secretly followed Lu Yuntao and eavesdropped on his conversation with Supreme Mo. However, after listening for a while, I was discovered. After I was caught, I found out that a few other sect masters had also gone to eavesdrop. Lu Yuntao brought us into the room. That's where I saw Supreme Mo. Lin Ran already knew what was going on, but in order not to make the Empress suspicious, when he heard Supreme Mo appear, he pretended to be anxious and asked, "What does Supreme Mo look like? Why did you say that he's not human?" "Because all I saw last night was a black fog." The man said with a reminiscent expression. "Anyway, I didn't see his face or hear his voice." After he placed a restriction on us, he asked Lu Yuntao to let us go. As soon as he finished speaking, the Empress and Hua Qiyun looked at each other with solemn expressions. Although this man was very cooperative, there was almost no useful information from him. After releasing a wisp of sword intent to knock the man out, Lin Ran turned around and looked at the Empress. "Your Majesty, I'm afraid this matter will get more serious if it drags on. I want to go to the 8-directional mountain to investigate." Before the Empress could say anything, Hua Qiyun rejected his proposal. "No, we've already announced at the banquet today that you're leaving the palace to destroy those sects that were involved in the rebellion. As far as I know, when King Zhao rebelled, the Tao-seeking sect was the first to join hands with them. Even if you want to go to the 8-directional mountain to investigate, you should go to the Tao-seeking sect first." The Empress nodded slightly when she heard that. Qiyun is right. No matter who this Supreme Mo is, since he's hiding in the dark, there's no need to be in a hurry to deal with him. We have to prioritize matters. Lin Ran was speechless as he thought to himself, what do the two of you know? If I'm slow and the demon escapes, it'll be difficult to find him again. However, he couldn't really say this out loud. Otherwise, the news of the demon breaking out of the seal would be exposed. Lin Ran immediately fell into a dilemma and felt conflicted. After thinking for a moment, Lin Ran suddenly smiled. "I have a way to get the best of both worlds." Chapter 82. Split Up, Unknown Enemies are the You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 82. Split Up, Unknown Enemies are the most dangerous translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. Hearing Lin Ran's words, the Empress and Hua Qiyun were confused. In their opinion, Lin Ran just had to go to the Tao-seeking sect first before going to the 8-directional mountain. Why did he have to think of a way to get the best of both worlds? However, since Lin Ran said so, the Empress still played along and asked, "Lord Lin, what do you have in mind?" Lin Ran pointed at Hua Qiyun. "He's quite capable. The Tao-seeking sect is already scared out of its wits by me. Let him pretend to be the sword god and go to settle the score." "Are you kidding me?" Hua Qiyun's expression changed and he waved his hand to refuse. "You're a half-saint, so you can naturally pretend to be Grandpa Sword God. I'm only at the peak of the 9th level of the Senior Martial Master realm. If I show up, I'll be seen through immediately. At that time, if the Tao-seeking sect gets angry for trying to fool them, I won't be able to handle it alone. That's easy. You want more cultivation? I can lend it to you." As Lin Ran spoke, he took off the 10-mile dragon roar from his waist and wiped it gently on the scabbard, leaving a sword intent on it. "With this sword, as long as you don't engage in a fight with anyone, no one will be able to see through you." Hua Qiyun took the 10 miles dragon roar with both hands and felt the sharp half-saint sword intent on it, but he still felt that it wasn't right. However, before Hua Qiyun could refuse, the Empress suddenly said, "In that case, let's do as Lord Lin says." "Empress sister. I say no more." The Empress raised her hand and interrupted Hua Qian. Go to the Tao-seeking sect to keep them from fleeing. After Lord Lin is done with his mission, he'll meet up with you. This plan didn't sound too bad. Hua Qian hesitated for a moment before agreeing. The Empress continued, there's no time to lose. Go and prepare to set off immediately. Hua Qian agreed and turned to leave with the 10 miles dragon roar. Lin Ran was about to leave when he saw the Empress staring at him with a scrutinizing gaze. Lin Ran felt that something was wrong. Why are you looking at me like that? Is there something wrong with my face? The Empress ignored Lin Ran's joke and continued to stare at him. Why do you insist on going to the 8-directional mountain? Do you know something? As expected, nothing can be hidden from her. Lin Ran heaved a long sigh in his heart, but he had a relaxed expression on his face. I don't know. That's why I insist on going. I think differently from you. In my opinion, unknown enemies are the most dangerous. The Empress narrowed her eyes, clearly doubting Lin Ran's words. However, in the end, she didn't continue asking. She sighed and said softly, I believe you must have your own reasons for making this choice. Don't let me down. Don't worry, boss. Lin Ran chuckled. The Empress looked at him intently before turning to leave. After the Empress left, Lin Ran heaved a sigh of relief, but then his expression turned serious. Outsiders might not know the actual situation, but Lin Ran knew very well that when he went to the 8-directional mountain this time, it was very likely that he would fight the demon that broke out of the seal. That was a demon that even caused the 10 miles sword god to lose his life. It would be a lie to say Lin Ran was not afraid. However, this fear was mostly due to caution. After all, when the 10 miles sword god was defeated, he was still at the peak of the 9th level of the senior grandmaster realm, whereas the demon was at the half-saint realm and played a dirty trick to win. Even so, the demon was still severely injured by the sword god. From the fact that it had been hiding for decades, the 10 miles sword god must have inflicted serious injury on him back then. Moreover, the demon had probably not fully recovered yet. Otherwise, there was no need for a demon of the half-saint realm to hide like this. All in all, Lin Ran felt that he had a high chance of winning. The only problem was how to keep the news from spreading. The ideal scenario was to kill the demon directly, but Lin Ran felt that this demon would not die so easily. Otherwise, back then, the 10 miles sword god would not have chosen to seal it. The second best scenario was to bring the demon back to Mount Sword and seal it again, but this would cause another problem. The demon would definitely not go back with Lin Ran obediently, and subduing the demon would inevitably cause a huge commotion. He had to find a way to hide the demon's identity, otherwise, once the news spread, the world would know that the demon had once escaped. Even if Lin Ran could seal it again, it would still affect the world's confidence in this seal. Lin Ran didn't know what to do. He had no choice but to set off for the 8-directional mountain first. He could think of a solution when the time came, but if he was late and the demon escaped, it would be a huge crisis for the world. After leaving Mingzhou Hall, Lin Ran took out a map. This was drawn by Hua Qian previously and marked the locations of almost all the sects in and outside the capital. After finding the location of the 8-directional mountain, Lin Ran rode his sword and soared into the sky. The 8-directional mountain was 300 kilometers away from the palace. In the time it took for an incense stick to burn, Lin Ran arrived above the 8-directional mountain and hid in the clouds. Looking down, there was a towering mountain peak standing in the wilderness. Looking down from above, the surroundings of the mountain had been cut into an octagon by someone. There were cliffs that were more than 100 feet tall in all directions. There was only one rope for people to climb up and down. This stopped ordinary people from disturbing them. On the cliff, a large number of thatched cottages were built against the mountain. There was a flat area on the top of the mountain. On the side of the training ground, a magnificent wooden building was built beside the cliff. It was probably the residence of Lu Yuntao and the sect elders. Lin Ran hid in the clouds and observed for a moment. Suddenly, he felt that the atmosphere on the mountain was a little strange. Currently, the sect master of the eight-directional mountain, Lu Yuntao, had already been killed in the palace, but the news had yet to reach the sect. Logically speaking, the disciples and elders on the mountain should be cultivating as they normally should, but on this huge mountain, there was not a single person. Could it be that because the sect master is not around, everyone is lazy and doesn't cultivate? Lin Ran thought to himself. Just as he was about to approach the mountain. Protecting array formation, he activated the Mystic Gate sword technique, and his figure disappeared, reappearing later on the training ground. Ding! New location detected. The host is in the eight-directional mountain sect. Host, do you want to sign in? The system notification suddenly sounded, but Lin Ran was in no mood to pay attention to it. Previously, because of the mountain. Protecting array formation, Lin Ran could only observe the mountain with his naked eye. But now that he was standing on the training ground, he realized that it was a little terrifyingly quiet. There was even a faint smell of blood in the air. Chapter 83. Silent Land, Uninhabited 8. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 83. Silent Land, Uninhabited 8. Directional Mountain Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. Lin Ran stood at the edge of the training ground. Beside him was the wooden building where Lu Yuntao lived. According to Zhou Jiqing and the others, that was where they saw the demon. Logically speaking, he should have rushed into the wooden building to find the traces of the demon, but the sudden smell of blood made him have an ominous feeling. Lin Ran hesitated for a moment. In the end, he decided to take a look at the situation first. Then, he activated the Mystic Gate sword technique and sneaked towards the thatched houses on the hill. The structure of these thatched houses was similar. They looked like they were for disciples to live in. They were built roughly, but there were quite a lot of them. The low eaves were almost connected, and there was only a narrow path between each house for people to pass through, which made it convenient for Lin Ran to sneak around. After flashing closer, he realized that there were too many thatched houses. It was obviously unrealistic to look at them one by one. Lin Ran could only start from the nearest one. After listening carefully and confirming that there was no movement inside, Lin Ran lifted the window panel and jumped in nimbly like a cat. This room was not small. It was 30 steps long and 15 steps wide. There was a wooden partition that divided the entire thatched house into two rooms, the bedroom and the living room. Lin Ran entered the bedroom through the window. He could tell that the furniture was of high quality. The person who lived here must be a highly valued disciple. The room was very clean, and the bedding on the bed was neatly folded. Lin Ran looked around and didn't find anything unusual, so he lifted the curtain and went to the living room. This place was also very clean. Lin Ran looked around and finally fixed his gaze on the table. There was nothing strange about the table. What was strange was that there was a cup of tea on the table. At this moment, it was steaming. Lin Ran picked up the teacup and took a look. The tea was still warm. It was as if someone had gone to do something else after making the tea. After patrolling the room and making sure that there was nothing unusual, Lin Ran climbed out of the window and went to another room. After checking 5 to 6 rooms in a row, he did not find anything unusual. Lin Ran felt that he was probably not going to find anything in this area, so he walked further and came to a small thatched house. Compared to the previous thatched houses, the thatched houses in this area looked a little shabby. Each house only had one room, and beside the bed were tables and chairs. The disciples living here must have lower statuses and were not so self-disciplined. Soon, Lin Ran found many personal items, such as books and drawings. When he was checking the fourth small thatched house, Lin Ran discovered something strange again. There was a white cloth covering the table, and underneath the cloth, something bulged. Lin Ran lifted the white cloth and saw a plate of marinated beef with half a steamed bun beside it. However, it didn't look like it was leftovers. Instead, it looked like someone was suddenly called away halfway through the meal, so he covered it with a cloth and prepared to come back to eat later. Thinking of the cup of tea, Lin Ran finally felt that something was wrong. Every house Lin Ran had been to, there were more or less traces of daily life. People who suddenly stopped halfway through doing something like this could be seen in almost every house. The strangest thing was that there was no one in this residential area. Lin Ran wasn't sure if there was anyone in the thatched houses further away, but he didn't see anyone in the area he had already checked. It was as if the people here suddenly stopped doing their things when they were called to assemble. Sect Master is not around. Why would they assemble? Lin Ran looked puzzled and subconsciously turned to look in the direction of the training ground at the top of the mountain. If it was really an emergency assembly that interrupted these people from doing their things, the only place they could go was that training ground. After hesitating for a moment, Lin Ran finally decided to take the risk and use his divine sense to investigate. Otherwise, if he checked the thatched houses one by one, it would take him a month. After finding a hidden corner, Lin Ran started spreading his divine sense. 15 minutes later, Lin Ran's divine sense had reached a mile away and covered almost half of the mountain, but he still couldn't find anyone. Could they really be at the top of the mountain? Can that wooden building accommodate so many people? Lin Ran muttered in his heart. He activated the Mystic Gate sword technique, and after a few flashes, he arrived at the training ground at the top of the mountain. Now, he was basically certain that there was no one here, so he did not have to hide like before. He walked straight to the wooden building at the end of the training ground. First, he released his divine sense to scout the way. Lin Ran instantly discovered the residual evil aura in the wooden building, but it was already very weak. Either the demon was seriously injured and its aura was weak, or it had been gone for a long time. Lin Ran was a little frustrated that he still came late. The demon was no longer here. Lin Ran couldn't be bothered to continue hiding. He stood in the middle of the training ground and exuded the majestic aura of a half-saint. The 10-mile sword god is here. Disciples of the 8-directional mountain, show yourself. A powerful aura swept through the entire mountain. Even the mountain protecting array formation was affected by this aura, and a hazy halo appeared in the air. However, the entire mountain was still silent. Lin Ran stood alone in the training ground and couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. Then, he realized that there was something strange in the room on the top floor. Wuxia Lin Ran appeared in midair as if he had teleported. Then, he casually slashed out a sword energy that instantly tore the entire roof into pieces. Countless wood chips and tiles flew out. Lin Ran took a closer look and his expression instantly became extremely solemn. In the room on the top floor, there were countless bones piled up. Chapter 84. Dangerous Girl, Something's Wrong. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 84. Dangerous Girl, Something's Wrong. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. Countless bones were stacked together like a dam built by beavers. From afar, it was a vast expanse of white. If not for the large number of skulls mixed in, Lin Ran wouldn't have recognized what it was. Suddenly, Lin Ran's eyes narrowed. In the next second, he appeared in the wooden building. Meanwhile, the flying wood shavings and tiles had yet to fall to the ground. Lin Ran stood still and summoned the yin-yang sword. The 3-essence sword technique and the 9-yin-yang sword technique were activated at the same time, giving out penetrating sword intent. At this moment, he looked like he was facing a great enemy. However, what appeared in the corner of the wooden building was only a little girl. The little girl was about 7 or 8 years old. Her face was round and she was wearing rough clothes. There were 2 braids on her head. She looked at Lin Ran with her big black eyes, as if wondering where this old man came from. On the surface, this little girl did not seem to pose any threat. However, for a 7 or 8-year-old girl to stand in front of this pile of bones without looking terrified was already enough to explain many things. Lin Ran tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword and asked in a low voice, "Who are you?" The girl didn't say anything and continued to look at Lin Ran with her big hollow eyes. "Are you from the mountains? Where are the others? What's with the bones?" Lin Ran asked more than 10 questions in a row, but he received no response. "Is she mute?" Lin Ran muttered to himself, but the girl opposite him suddenly spoke. "Interesting, very interesting." The little girl spoke clearly, but her voice sounded a little strange, as if she was afraid that Lin Ran would recognize her voice, so she deliberately used a strange voice. "So you can talk." Lin Ran smiled and straightened his body. He seemed to have let down his guard, but the surging power in his body was still on the verge of eruption. "Are you from the mountains?" Lin Ran asked the same question again. The girl still didn't say anything, but this time, she shook her head. "So you're not a local?" Lin Ran asked. "Then do you know what's with the bones?" The girl nodded. "It's related to you, isn't it?" Lin Ran continued to ask with a kind smile on his face and a relaxed tone, but his words were terrifying. "You killed these people and devoured their flesh and blood. Is this some kind of a cultivation technique?" "No, no. It should be a way to heal your injuries, right? Evil demon." The girl listened quietly, her big black eyes like a bottomless pool of water. After Lin Ran finished speaking, the girl nodded and smiled strangely, as if an invisible hand was tugging at the corner of her mouth. "So you recognized me?" Hearing that the girl, or rather, the demon, had admitted her identity, Lin Ran couldn't help but feel surprised. Ever since Lin Ran was determined to bring the demon back to Mount Sword, he had imagined the scene of meeting the demon countless times. However, he had never thought that the infamous demon was actually a harmless-looking little girl. However, when he used his divine sense to investigate the wooden building just now, he did find a familiar evil aura in this little girl's body. The two of them looked at each other across the mounds of bones. The girl's clear eyes landed on the yin-yang sword in Lin Ran's hand. "You have my aura on your sword, but you're not me. You have his aura on you, but you're not him. Why are you like this? Maybe it's fate." Lin Ran looked at the yin-yang sword in his hand and smiled with emotion. "I inherited a portion of Sword God's internal energy. This sword is stained with a portion of your evil aura, but no matter what, I will use this power to completely destroy you." "Is that so?" The strange smile on the girl's face widened. "Interesting, very interesting. You don't even know where I am, and you actually want to destroy me." Lin Ran frowned slightly. "Aren't you here?" "I'm here, but at the same time, I'm not here." As the girl spoke, she pointed at herself with the hand that was holding the rattle drum. "This is just a puppet. Everyone in her village is dead. I left a wisp of evil aura in her body to see what kind of person is pretending to be the 10-mile sword god." When she said, pretending to be the 10-mile sword god, the girl's tone did not fluctuate at all, as if she had already known about this. Back then, the 10-mile sword god had died at the hands of this demon, so when it heard that the sword god had come out of seclusion, it immediately knew that the news was fake. However, this would raise another problem. Since the demon was already certain that the sword god was dead, why didn't he just tell Lu Yuntao about it? Instead, he asked Lu Yuntao to lure everyone to the state banquet to test the waters. Countless questions poured out like a fountain, but now was not the time to think. Lin Ran took a deep breath and looked at the girl's dark eyes from afar. "Although she is only a puppet, if I kill her, you will also be injured, right?" The girl looked at Lin Ran with a strange smile. There was no fear on her young face. "You can try." "All right." Lin Ran nodded and walked towards the girl with the yin-yang sword. With the first step forward, countless destructive sword energy crushed the bones blocking the way. With the second step forward, invisible sword energy formed a cage that instantly trapped the girl. With the third step forward, Lin Ran was already in front of the girl. The tip of the yin-yang sword was less than half an inch away from the girl's throat. Even so, there was no fear on the girl's face. Endless sharp sword intent wreaked havoc around her like a snowstorm in winter, but she seemed to be bathing in the spring sun without even bothering to flinch. You win. Lin Ran sighed and sat down cross-legged in front of the girl, placing the yin-yang sword horizontally on his lap. Why? You can't do it. The girl continued to ask with a strange smile, didn't you want to destroy me? Why are you giving up so quickly? I just don't want you to get what you want. Lin Ran shrugged and analyzed as if he was talking to himself, even if I kill her, you will only lose a wisp of evil aura. The girl did not speak, but her eyes suddenly turned cold. Lin Ran looked at the girl and smiled brightly. Unfortunately, he was wearing the face of the 10-mile sword god, making this smile look more frightening. You want to find out more about me, and I want to find out more about you. Why don't we talk? Chapter 85. 8-Directional Mountain, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 85. 8-Directional Mountain, destroying the sect with 1/translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. The girl looked at Lin Ran as if she wanted to see through him from his expression. However, Lin Ran still had a sinister smile on his face. The girl looked at him for a long time before giving up. Interesting, very interesting. The strange smile on her face disappeared. How do you want to talk? Take turns asking questions. Every time one of us asks a question, the person who answers must give an accurate answer. Lin Ran smiled and raised his hand. After you. The girl said nothing, as if trying to figure out if it was a trap. After half a minute, she said, who are you? Lin Ran. Lin Ran replied readily, and the girl immediately frowned. I didn't ask for your name. I asked for your identity. It's fine. You can wait for the next question to ask me that. Lin Ran waved his hand and smiled. What do I have to do to find you? The girl did not speak. At first, Lin Ran thought that she was thinking about the answer. After a long while, he realized that she was refusing to answer. Lin Ran's expression darkened. It's only the first question and you're already going back on your words. Do you want to talk or not? A strange smile appeared on the girl's face again. Kill me if you dare. I'm not going to kill you. Lin Ran smiled and looked at the girl as if she was a fool. As soon as I attack, you'll know everything about me, so I won't kill this girl until I obtain enough information about you. The smile on the girl's face instantly disappeared. Then let's waste time here. I won't answer this question. Fine, I'll change it. Lin Ran asked, what do I have to do to kill you? You can't kill me. The girl answered very quickly this time. Lin Ran subconsciously asked, why can't I kill you? That's another question. The girl blinked, a hint of slyness reflected in her hollow eyes. Lin Ran couldn't help but laugh and raised his hand. Ask away. What is your identity? Commander of the Imperial Guards. Lin Ran quickly replied, then asked almost at the same time, why can't I kill you? The girl was still thinking about what Commander of the Imperial Guards was when she subconsciously replied, no way. You just can't kill me. Lin Ran's eyes flickered. The girl spoke in the manner of plain statement of fact. In other words, it wasn't the difference in their strength that made the demon unkillable. Back then, the 10-mile sword god, who was at the peak of the 9th level of the senior grandmaster realm, couldn't kill the demon. Now that Lin Ran had entered the half-saint realm, he still couldn't. Even if he entered the realm of saint, it might still be the case. Therefore, the 10-mile sword god could only choose to seal the demon instead of killing it. For some reason, Lin Ran thought of the wisp of will of the world that suddenly appeared when he formed the 5 elements divine beasts with sword energy. Although it was only a tiny wisp, it almost made Lin Ran lose control of his sword intent. Most importantly, the will of the world could not be resisted or absorbed. If not for the fact that the yin yang sword had appeared to protect him, Lin Ran would probably be 6 feet under now. Could it be that this demon also belonged to the will of the world? Lin Ran retracted his thought and said, "It's your turn. I have no more questions." The girl said coldly, "You won't answer me honestly even if I ask." Lin Ran scratched his head in embarrassment. The girl snorted. "Kill her now, or I'll let her kill herself." All right. I'll do it." Lin Ran shrugged and stood up to place the yin-yang sword on the girl's neck. However, there was still no fear on the girl's face. There was even a hint of fanaticism in her hollow eyes. She couldn't wait to die under Lin Ran's sword. "I'll take this life for you," Lin Ran said coldly. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. "By the way, since you've told me so much, let me tell you a secret." The girl's hollow eyes flicked. "What secret?" "Not only is this sword good looking, but it also has a special function," Lin Ran whispered. Before the girl could hear everything, a black and white halo suddenly appeared on the sword and instantly enveloped the two of them. A moment later, the halo dissipated, and the girl was already lying limply in Lin Ran's arms. After using his divine sense to check and confirm that there was no evil aura left, Lin Ran looked at the yin-yang sword in his hand and couldn't help but feel a little lingering fear. If not for the fact that the yin-yang sword happened to have the ability to absorb evil aura, he would have really killed this little girl today. Looking at the little girl in his arms whose eyelashes fluttered slightly, Lin Ran wondered what sweet dreams she was having. Lin Ran smiled and used his sword energy to form a barrier to protect the little girl. Then, he tapped the ground and jumped into the sky like an agile cat. The winds howled, but there was no noise inside the sword energy barrier. Lin Ran looked down at the girl. After confirming that her sleep was not disturbed, his eyes turned cold as he raised the yin-yang sword and slashed down. Billions of sharp sword energy wreaked havoc like an apocalyptic earthquake. Endless cold light flickered in the air, and it could even be seen dozens of kilometers away. A huge sword phantom condensed from sword energy tore through the sky and smashed into the 8-directional mountain. Boom! After a loud bang, the mountain that was hundreds of feet tall split into two, but this was only the beginning. After cutting open the mountain, the huge sword phantom tore open a colossal gap on the ground. Countless boulders and rubble mixed with bones fell into the pitch black gap. When the mountain was completely wiped off the face of the earth, the gap closed on its own. This slash was not only to eliminate the traces of the demon, but also to warn the other sections. After all, other than Lin Ran, no one knew what had happened here. On that day, everyone within 100 miles of the 8-directional mountain saw a sword phantom descend from the sky. On that day, the entire 8-directional mountain was reduced to rubbles. On that day, a total of 1,731 elders and disciples of the 8-directional mountain sect were wiped out of the face of the earth. According to the historical records of later generations, in the year 341 of the Saint calendar, the second sect on the sacred martial roll, the 8-directional mountain sect, plotted a rebellion and was destroyed. Chapter 86. It's good to repent. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 86. It's good to repent. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. In the palace, in Mingzhou Hall. Lin Ran had gone for a few hours. The incense burner was lit with ambergris, but there was still a faint smell of blood in the air. Lin Ran rubbed his nose and did not leave the girl here. Instead, he went to the imperial study. On the desk, all kinds of scrolls were piled up like a mountain, almost covering the empress's figure. Suddenly, a strong wind blew past her. The empress looked up and saw Lin Ran standing in the imperial study with a little girl in his arms. The Empress was stunned for a moment. Then she stood up and teased, "I have so many consorts in the palace. Why do you have to bring back a homeless child?" Surprisingly, Lin Ran didn't talk back. He just looked at the little girl in his arms. "She's the only one left in her village." The Empress's expression turned cold. What happened? Were the villagers affected by the battle? Is there anyone in the eight-directional mountain who can fight you? No, it's just. Forget it, I can't explain it in a few words. Lin Ran wanted to explain, but he realized that he didn't know how to start. He paused for a moment and said, "I caused a commotion at the eight-directional mountain just now. The Tao-seeking sect has probably sensed it. Hua Qiyun is in danger. I have to go there immediately." The Empress nodded. Lin Ran said, "But it's inconvenient to bring the child along. Why don't you help me take care of her for a while?" "What did you say?" The Empress's expression turned serious. She frowned and scolded in a low voice, "I'm the emperor of a country. How dare you ask me to take care of a child?" Lin Ran said with a cheeky smile, "You'll have a child sooner or later anyway. Just treat it as a rehearsal." The Empress was speechless. Just when she wanted to say something, Lin Ran was no longer in the imperial study. Only the little girl was lying on the low couch where she usually rested. After staring at the little girl for a while, the Empress suddenly realized that this little girl was quite cute. She couldn't help but smile and cover the girl with the dragon robe. Tianjue Peak, Tao-seeking sect. After entrusting the little girl to the Empress, Lin Ran immediately rushed here. Previously, when he destroyed the eight-directional mountain, the commotion caused could probably be felt within 100 miles. Most likely, the people of the Tao-seeking sect already knew about it. This way, Hua Qiyun, who was pretending to be the sword god, would be in a very dangerous situation. The power of that strike is something only a half-saint can achieve. However, if the 10-mile sword god is on the eight-directional mountain, who will the sword god on Tianjue Peak? As long as anyone thought about this, what awaited Hua Qiyun would be death. "Hold on. You must hold on," Lin Ran muttered to himself as he rode on his sword. However, when he saw the entrance of the Tao-seeking sect, he instantly swallowed his words. The Tao-seeking sect's mountain gate was 100 feet tall and was carved from white jade. The words, Tao-seeking sect, were engraved on the lintel. Although there were no fancy decorations, it was still magnificent. However, at this moment, the entire mountain gate was covered by a yellow flag. Even the words, Tao-seeking sect, were blocked. These guys have a strong desire to live. Lin Ran looked at the mountain gate with his mouth agape. He suddenly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Previously, Lin Ran added a sentence on the invitation letter the Empress wrote, asking those sects that were too far away to hang yellow flags on their mountain gates. This would indicate that they were willing to submit to the Heavenly Saint dynasty. Although the Tao-seeking sect was not far from the capital, they did not dare to attend the state banquet. However, looking at the size of the yellow flag on the mountain gate, Lin Ran knew that these people knew very well what they'd done wrong. After observing for a while, Lin Ran went straight through the mountain gate and headed for the top. Not long after, he arrived at the hinterland of the mountain and saw Hua Qiyun in the arena. However, the strange thing was that Hua Qiyun was not disguised as the 10-mile sword god. Instead, he was sparring with others in his true identity. At the same time, the people present also discovered Lin Ran. Seeing an unfamiliar old man enter the sect, the Tao-seeking sect disciples subconsciously drew their swords. However, when they felt the terrifying aura coming from Lin Ran, their faces turned pale in an instant. At this moment, Hua Qiyun looked up and saw Lin Ran. He immediately jumped off the arena and raised the 10 miles dragon roar with both hands. Shifu! Shifu! He's the 10-mile sword god. No wonder his aura is so powerful. Quickly inform the sect master. The surrounding disciples instantly burst into uproar, but no one attacked Lin Ran. Although Lin Ran didn't know what was going on, he was not in the least worried. He landed in front of Hua Qiyun and asked in a low voice, "What's going on? Why aren't you wearing a mask? When I saw the yellow flag hanging on the gate, I thought there was no need to use a mask. The war with the Great Yong dynasty is imminent. It's time to recruit people. If they repent from the bottom of their hearts, it's not a bad thing to give them a chance," Hua Qiyun replied quickly. Then, he patted the dragon roar sword on Lin Ran's waist. "I told them that I'm the disciple of the 10 Miles Sword God and that I came to visit on behalf of my Shifu with the 10 Miles Dragon Roar." Lin Ran just nodded to show that he understood when a large group of people came from afar. The person in the lead was Zhou Hao, the sect master of the Tao-seeking sect, whom Lin Ran had seen in King Zhao's tent. "Sword God. I didn't know that you would come. Please don't take offense to us not being at the gate to receive you." Zhou Hao was still a dozen steps away from Lin Ran when he bowed to apologize. His smile was so wide that it reached his ears. If outsiders saw this fawning look, no one would think that he was the head of a sect. "Sect Master Zhou, you're being too polite. I should be the one apologizing." Lin Ran chuckled. He was wearing a human skin mask, so he wasn't afraid that Zhou Hao would recognize him. When Zhou Hao heard this, he was about to kneel on the ground. "Sword God. You're flattering me. There is no need for you to apologize. From now on, the Tao-seeking sect is your home. You can come and go as you please." Lin Ran nodded and put his hand on the hilt of the dragon roar sword at his waist. He said in a strange tone, "That depends on whether or not the Tao-seeking sect will still exist in this world." When Zhou Hao heard this, his face instantly turned pale and he collapsed to the ground. He had just received the news that the 8-directional mountain had been annihilated. Now, from what the 10 Miles Sword God said, he seemed to want to annihilate them too. Chapter 87. Roping in the Tao-seeking sect. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 87. Roping in the Tao-seeking sect. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. When he first found out that the Sword God had come out of seclusion, Zhou Hao indeed wanted to run. However, later on, Lin Ran sent a message with the Mount Sword Sect token, threatening to chase him to the ends of the earth if he ran. Zhou Hao had no choice but to stay. Therefore, after seeing the invitation from the palace, although Zhou Hao did not dare to attend the banquet, he immediately ordered his disciples to hang yellow flags all over the mountain gate to show his loyalty. After that, Hua Qiyun came with the 10 Miles Dragon Roar. Zhou Hao also treated him with hospitality. However, he did not expect that all his efforts would be in vain. The 10 Miles Sword God still wanted to exterminate his entire Tao-seeking sect. The more he thought about it, the more aggrieved he felt. He didn't care about his status as the sect master of the Tao-seeking sect and immediately broke down crying. "Sword God, I admit that I did something wrong in the past, but I was also deceived by King Zhao. The moment elder son broke through to the Grandmaster realm, he was beaten into a cripple by that mountain guardian surnamed Lin. He's still lying in bed in a coma. I have to use all kinds of spiritual pills to keep him alive every day. I spent the most effort and money during the rebellion, and lots of my disciples died. In the end, I did not obtain anything. It's unfair." A huge grievance welled up in his heart. Zhou Hao was like a resentful woman who had suffered a lot. He did not care if he could say anything or not. In any case, he spilled the beans. Lin Ran and Hua Qiyun were dumbfounded looking at Zhou Hao. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, who would believe that the sect master of the Tao-seeking sect had such a side to him? The surrounding Tao-seeking sect disciples also looked ashamed. When Lin Ran saw their gazes, he knew that some of them definitely wanted to leave the sect. However, Lin Ran couldn't bear to see Zhou Hao in such a miserable state. He just wanted to scare him and see how he would react, but he didn't expect him to be so weak and fragile. Lin Ran explained that he wouldn't resort to violence, but Zhou Hao refused to listen. In the end, someone invited the elders of the Tao-seeking sect over. After they consoled him for a long time, Zhou Hao finally calmed down. Then, both parties came to the living room. After taking their seats, Lin Ran said, "Let's not beat around the bush. I'm here today to settle scores with your sect on behalf of His Majesty." When Zhou Hao heard that, he was about to cry again. Lin Ran hurriedly said, "But after I came here, I can feel that you're really repenting, so I want to give you a chance to make amends. I wonder if you're willing." The elders looked at each other and then at Zhou Hao. Zhou Hao wiped his tears and asked tentatively, "Sword God, can you tell me what chance it is first?" "Join the army." Lin Ran said bluntly, "Form an elite army of disciples who are above the first-level martial master realm and below the ninth-level senior martial master realm in your sect. When we attack, you'll charge in front. When we retreat, you'll cover us." At the side, Hua Qian widened his eyes in surprise and questioning, as if to say, "Are you supposed to tell them this so early?" Lin Ran blinked, indicating that he knew what he was doing. Zhou Hao lowered his head and pondered for a moment. With a strange expression, he asked, "Sword God, why does this elite army you mentioned sound like a shield?" "You could say that." Lin Ran nodded and placed his hand on the hilt of his sword. "Or you can refuse." "No, no, no. We won't refuse." Zhou Hao hurriedly waved his hand when he saw Lin Ran's actions. He paused and said awkwardly, "But Sword God, can I make a request?" Zhou Hao looked back at the elders and suddenly knelt down in front of Lin Ran. "Sword God, it was my decision to participate in King Zhao's rebellion. You and His Majesty can punish me however you want, but the disciples are innocent." Zhou Hao knelt on the ground and looked straight at Lin Ran. "I don't want any disciple of the sect to die in vain because of my decision. That's why I want to make a request. Let me gather the disciples of the sect and tell them this. If any disciple wants to leave the sect, I won't force him to stay, and you can't force him to join the army either. We pledge our lives to follow the sect master. Sword God, please agree to this request." An elder knelt down and said. Then, the remaining elders knelt down as well. "We pledge our lives to follow the sect master. Sword God, please agree to this request." Lin Ran and Hua Qian looked at each other in surprise. After a moment, Hua Qian nodded. Lin Ran said, "Since sect master Zhou cherishes his disciples so much, I'll agree to your request. However, you have to tell me about the people who participated in the rebellion first." "Thank you for your understanding, Sword God." Zhou Hao kowtowed to thank him. Then, he took out a bamboo slip and held it above his head with both hands. "This is the list of all the sects that participated in the rebellion. Some individual cultivators are also recorded." "Oh. You seem to be well prepared." Lin Ran chuckled and took the bamboo slip. He realized that it was quite detailed. Lin Ran had long known about a few of the sects, such as Mount Qianyuan and Silver Cave. However, he didn't find the eight-directional mountain. From this, it seems that the eight-directional mountain is just used by the demon. Lin Ran thought to himself. Then, he waved the bamboo slip in his hand. Although none of the sects are famous, there are a lot of them. It seems that sect master Zhou does have a lot of friends. Zhou Hao smiled awkwardly. Lin Ran continued, "I have something to ask of you. Can you help me?" "I will do my best. There's an agreement between the dynasties that those above the Grand Master realm are not allowed to participate in the battle. Do you know about this?" Seeing Zhou Hao nod, Lin Ran continued, "So as the sect master, you definitely can't go to the battlefield, but don't be idle. Help me investigate where strange murders have happened recently." "Strange murder?" Zhou Hao looked confused. May I ask, what do you mean by strange? The kind where a lot of people die at once, or a person becomes a pile of bones as soon as they are dead. Lin Ran thought for a moment and explained. After talking to the demon at the eight-directional mountain, he was already certain that the demon was using human flesh and blood to heal his injuries. He couldn't save those who had died, but he could find the demon to prevent more people from dying. Chapter 88. New clue, two possibilities. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 88. New clue, two possibilities. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. Of course, Zhou Hao didn't know what Lin Ran was thinking. When he was asked to investigate this kind of murder case, he couldn't help but find it strange. Sword God, is there a reason why you want me to do this? Hua Qiyun also looked at Lin Ran with a curious gaze. In his heart, he always had a plan. It was a list of problems that he had summarized over the years. If the Heavenly Saint dynasty wanted to live in peace for a long time, these problems had to be solved as soon as possible. However, what Lin Rai said wasn't one of the problems. Lin Ran wanted to find an excuse to fool him, but he suddenly thought of something and narrowed his eyes at Zhou Hao. From what you said, you seem to know something. Zhou Hao did not dare to lie in front of the 10-mile sword god. After a pause, he hurriedly said, I don't know the details, but your description just now reminds me of an unsolved case from decades ago. Do you even remember something that happened decades ago? Lin Ran raised his eyebrows in surprise. Tell me about it. Sword God, you got me wrong. It's not that I have a good memory. That unsolved case is too strange and hard to forget. Zhou Hao let out an embarrassed smile, and a hint of reminiscence appeared in his eyes. About 60 years ago, I was just an ordinary disciple of the Tao-seeking sect. I was ordered by my late master to travel outside to gain experiences. When I arrived at a village one day, I wanted to go in and get some water, but I realized that the village was very strange. There were farming tools thrown everywhere and unfinished food in every house, but I walked through the entire village and didn't see anyone. When Lin Ran heard this, his pupils constricted. This was almost the same situation as what he had encountered on the eight-directional mountain. Zhou Hao didn't notice the change in Lin Ran's expression and continued, at that time, I thought that the villagers were going out together, so I didn't pay much attention to it. But a few days later, I heard, on that day, a total of more than 3,000 people went missing in 7 villages. 3 days later, the officials found a large number of bones in a mountain 20 miles away. After the coroner counted them, they basically matched the number of the missing villagers. Hua Qiyun continued Zhou Hao's words. Seeing that Lin Ran and Zhou Hao were both looking at him, he said factly, at that time, I was also traveling around. That case concerned the lives of more than 3,000 people. Of course I've heard about it. Lin Ran looked at him solemnly. Have you been to that mountain? What do the bones look like? Hua Qiyun shook his head. I was at the southern border at that time. When I came back and wanted to visit the mountain, it had already been cleaned up by the officials. But what else could the bones look like? I doubt I've been there. Zhou Hao raised his hand hesitantly. Sword God, when it happened back then, I was nearby. Later, I went to the call to take a look. The valley that was dozens of feet deep was filled with bones. All the bones were so clean that it looked like, Zhou Hao looked troubled, as if he did not know how to describe it. Lin Ran thought of something. Like jade. Zhou Hao immediately nodded. Yes. Jade. Like jade. Lin Ran's heart skipped a beat and he asked, then do you remember what the 7 villages are called? I really can't remember this. Zhou Hao shook his head in embarrassment. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as he thought of something. By the way, those villages are near Mount Sword where you were in seclusion. There you go. Lin Ran exclaimed in his heart. He could basically conclude that this unsolved case was caused by the demon. The time when the case took place was exactly the same as when the demon broke the seal. When all the dots were connected, Lin Ran felt inexplicably refreshed. 60 years ago, the demon broke through to the half-saint realm and fought with the 10-mile sword god in the cave. After that, the demon used tricks to defeat and kill the 10-mile sword god. However, the demon was also severely injured by the 10-mile sword god. After escaping from Mount Sword, it used the flesh and blood of the villagers in the nearby village to repair its injuries. After that, it disappeared without a trace until Lin Ran discovered it not long ago. In Lin Ran's mind, the thread began to split and lead to two different possibilities. The first possibility was that the demon could devour flesh and drink blood to heal. In the past 60 years, the demon must have done this often, but it still didn't dare to face Lin Ran in its true form, which meant that it hadn't returned to its peak state. The second possibility was that the demons could devour flesh and drink blood to increase its cultivation. If that was the case, even if the demon only devoured one person a day, there would still be a total amount of more than 20,000 lives taken over the course of 60 years. Lin Ran could not imagine how powerful the demon was now. At this moment, Lin Ran could only think of these two possibilities. He couldn't help but feel conflicted. If it was the former, after Lin Ran found traces of the demon, he could just kill it with his sword. But if it was the latter, he had to be prepared. But no matter what, Lin Ran had never thought of giving up. After sorting out what to do next, Lin Ran looked at Zhou Hao. Since you've seen that scene with your own eyes, it must be much easier to investigate. Go, after the meeting, start investigating. Yes. After Zhou Hao bowed respectfully, he stood up and left with the elders. After a few of them walked away, Hua Qiyun couldn't help but step forward and say, "What's wrong with you? Although it's time to recruit people, isn't it inappropriate for you to tell them that the war is about to begin? Do you think they're all fools?" Lin Ran glanced at Hua Qiyun and said helplessly, "All these years, the great Yong dynasty has repeatedly invaded the border. Your Empress sister declared officially that the Heavenly Saint dynasty will not abandon any city or chase after the enemy, but do you really think she'll let it go just like that?" Hua Qiyun was speechless for a moment. Lin Ran continued, "Besides, the great Yong dynasty has been gathering troops since 3 years ago. Now, if you go to the north and ask any commoner, they all know about this. They've never thought of hiding it." Hua Qiyun's expression began to turn solemn, but he still argued stubbornly, "Even so, the war between the two countries is still not declared. War is inevitable, but when to start is uncertain." "Silly child." Lin Ran stood up and patted Hua Qiyun's shoulder. He was almost a head taller than Hua Qiyun, and this action made him look like an elder lecturing a junior. When the 10-mile sword god came out of seclusion, the war had already begun. Hua Qiyun shook off Lin Ran's hand. Just as he was about to speak with a heavy expression, he suddenly seemed to understand something, and his youthful face instantly turned pale. Seeing Hua Qiyun's reaction, Lin Ran knew that he understood. He smiled and didn't say anything else. He brought the dragon roar sword and walked towards the sect training ground, wanting to see how Zhou Hao was going to hold this assembly. Chapter 89. One strike, all it takes is one strike. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 89. One strike, all it takes is one strike. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. Everyone knew that in a war, the charging troop always had the highest casualty rate. Letting the Tao-seeking sect's disciples join the army was basically sending them to their deaths. Most importantly, ordinary soldiers could retire at an old age. As for these people, unless the Heavenly Saint dynasty unified the world and there were no more wars, they must stay in the army until they died in battle or died of old age. It was precisely because of this that Zhou Hao suggested explaining the pros and cons to the disciples. Lin Ran wasn't an unreasonable person, so he agreed to Zhou Hao's request. When Lin Ran came out of the room, he saw that the training ground was so crowded that there was barely any space for another person. Even so, occasionally, there were still disciples rushing over from all over the sect and continuing to squeeze into the enormous crowd. Zhou Hao and the elders stood on the platform and faced the countless disciples below. It was impossible to tell if they were sad or guilty. "Do you think they'll object?" Hua Qiyun asked. "Who knows?" Lin Ran said, narrowing his eyes, "That's why I have to keep an eye on their attitude." Hua Qiyun nodded. After a few seconds, he continued, "There are about 1,500 people here. Their average cultivation level is at the 6th level of the senior martial master realm. According to the information, Zhou Hao's cultivation level should be at the 4th level of the Grand Master realm. As for the elders, they should be around the same level as me." Lin Ran tilted his head and glanced at Hua Qiyun. "What are you trying to say?" Hua Qiyun looked at the huge crowd not far away, and a cold glint flashed across his eyes. "What I want to say is that if a fight breaks out later, I'll leave Zhou Hao and the elders to you. I'll try my best to stall for time for you. By the way, how long will it take you to deal with them?" Lin Ran thought for a moment and extended a finger. 1 hour. Hua Qiyun nodded thoughtfully. 1 against 1, 500. I should be able to, but you'd better be quicker. I meant 1 stroke. Lin Ran looked at Hua Qiyun with a faint smile and stretched out his finger. "Just 1 strike." Hua Qiyun's eyes were filled with shock. After a while, he came back to his senses and muttered softly, "Monster." Lin Ran smiled and didn't say anything. He casually raised the dragon roar sword at his waist and stroked the smooth blade with his fingertips. A moment later, Lin Ran sheathed his sword inside, as if something had disappointed him. At the side, Hua Qiyun frowned as he watched Lin Ran draw his sword and put it away. He couldn't help but curse in his heart, "Weirdo." After waiting for another half an hour, no new disciples appeared. Zhou Hao took a few deep breaths and said to the crowd, "Disciples, first of all, I want to thank you for trusting me for so many years." With that, Zhou Hao bowed deeply to all the disciples. Almost at the same time, all the disciples knelt down to return the greeting. Even if some disciples were pushed out of the training ground into the gravel road, they still knelt down without hesitation. When Zhou Hao stood up, his eyes were red, but his voice was still calm. "Everyone knows that I made a huge mistake a while ago. To stone for this mistake, I deserve to be cut into pieces. However, His Majesty loves the people as if they were his children. He gave me a chance to make up for my mistake. That is, he wants disciples above the martial master realm and below the Grand Master to join the army and be the shield for the soldiers of the Heavenly Saint dynasty. He wants you to suffer." At this point, Zhou Hao turned around and looked at the two of them. Hua Qiyun instantly grabbed the hilt of his sword, but Lin Ran stopped him. "Take it easy. Let him finish." Lin Ran smiled and gestured for Zhou Hao to continue. Only then did Zhou Hao turn to the disciples. "You didn't hear wrongly. We will be the shield and the ones to suffer. I know that I have to take responsibility for my own actions. Therefore, I specially asked Sword God for a chance to let you choose. If you don't want to be implicated by me, you can leave the Tao-seeking sect now. Sword God has said that those who quit will no longer be forced to join the army." After saying that, Zhou Hao put his hands behind his back and stopped talking. Unwillingness, sadness, hatred, and self-blame flashed across his eyes one by one. In the end, they mixed together and became the calmness found in people who had seen the vicissitude of life. Silent. The training ground packed with 1,500 people was dead silent. Hua Qiyun looked at these people expressionlessly. His hand that was holding the hilt of his sword was sweating. After an unknown period of time, it might have been 15 minutes or an hour. A voice suddenly shouted from the crowd, "Sect Master. We're going to die anyway. Why don't we fight back? We can't wait any longer." Hua Qiyun's expression turned cold. He suddenly activated his internal energy to break free from Lin Ran. However, before he could unsheath his sword, a spiritual sword suddenly sounded and a head flew high into the air. The blood dripped down like spring rain, covering the faces of many disciples with a layer of scarlet red. Many people revealed terrified expressions, but no one said anything. Hua Qian was stunned. His sword was still in its sheath, and Lin Ran didn't move either. Then who did that? I've already made a mistake, and I don't want to make it again. On the platform, Zhou Hao sheathed his sword. He looked coldly at the disciples below the stage. I don't care if you stay or leave, but if anyone dares to rebel, I, Zhou Hao, will be the first to punish them. At this point, Hua Qian finally looked enlightened. He suddenly turned to look at Lin Ran. You didn't let me attack, because you knew that he was really sincere in repenting, right? Lin Ran frowned slightly and narrowed his eyes in confusion. Is it really important if he's sincere? Hua Qian wanted to say that it was of course important, but when he saw the confidence in Lin Ran's eyes, he suddenly realized that it didn't matter. Regardless of whether Zhou Hao was sincere or not, as long as he dared to betray the Heavenly Saint dynasty, Lin Ran could just kill him. In any case, to Lin Ran, it was just a matter of one strike. After figuring this out, Hua Qian looked at Lin Ran with admiration. If I cultivate hard enough, can I become as powerful as you? Who knows? Lin Ran chuckled again. His casual expression made Hua Qian clench his fists. Before knowing Lin Ran, Hua Qian had never thought that Sword God's face could be so annoying. At this moment, Lin Ran suddenly raised his chin and said, "Stop fooling around. The show is about to begin." Chapter 90. Swords have two blades. People, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 90. Swords have two blades, people have two sides. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. Seeing how serious Lin Ran was, Hua Qian could only put aside his personal grudge for the time being and look at the training ground. Someone in the crowd raised his hand, but there were too many people. Hua Qian couldn't see the person who raised his hand at all. He could only hear a trembling voice say, "Sect Master. My parents still need to be taken care of. Sect Master, please allow me to quit." "Granted." Zhou Hao nodded. Then, he took out a golden leaf from his belt and threw it in that direction. "You've been on the mountain for 3 years, but you haven't made any progress. Take this money back and start a small business." "Thank you, Sect Master." After that person thanked him loudly, the crowd burst into an uproar. A moment later, an honest-looking young man walked out of the crowd and took off his hat. He placed it on the ground respectfully and kowtowed 3 times before turning around and walking down the mountain. "Gnav Om, Sect Master, I've only been married for less than a month, granted. Sect Master, I'm the only son of my family, granted. Sect Master, granted." In the following period of time, more than 200 people left the Tao-seeking sect. No matter what reason they gave, or if there was no reason, Zhou Hao's answer was always, "Granted," and a golden leaf. 15 minutes later, the training ground fell silent again. At this moment, there were only about 1,300 people left. Zhou Hao looked around for a moment. Those below the martial master realm, leave. As soon as he finished speaking, another 400 to 500 people left. Zhou Hao treated everyone equally and gave each of them a golden leaf. After nearly half of the disciples left, the training ground was finally less crowded. Tears appeared in Zhou Hao's eyes once again. From today onwards, the Tao-seeking sect is officially disbanded. I, Zhou Hao, thank you, fellow Taoists. As soon as he finished speaking, Zhou Hao knelt on the ground with his hands folded on his forehead and bowed deeply to the remaining disciples below the stage. This time, no one bowed back. Since the sect was disbanded, the rules of the sect were naturally gone. Zhou Hao knelt on the ground, his shoulders trembling. As the breeze blew the training ground, sobs were heard. Gradually, it became louder and louder. No one knew what they were crying about. Perhaps even they themselves did not know. The air was filled with suppressed sadness. Even Hua Qiyun couldn't help but be moved, but his eyes were still filled with confusion. Why are there so many people loyal to a person like Zhou Hao? 746 golden leaves is almost 30 years' worth of salary for a first-rank official. Lin Ran rubbed the corners of his eyes and put on a casual smile. There are two sides to a sword. Perhaps he's not a good person, but he's indeed a good sect master. Hua Qiyun didn't say anything. He just looked at the grieving Zhou Hao on the platform, his eyes flickering as he pondered about something. At night, in the main building of the Tao-seeking sect, Lin Ran and Hua Qiyun sat at a round table that was 10 feet wide. Beside them were Zhou Hao and the elders of the Tao-seeking sect. On the dining table that was big enough to roll on, there were only a dozen simple dishes. Most of them were something black that didn't look edible at all. Sword God, the disciples working in the kitchen left the mountain today. This is cooked by me and the elders. If you don't mind, Zhou Hao couldn't continue. The awkward expression on his face even made Hua Qiyun's heart ache. Sect Master Zhou, you don't have to be so polite. Although the dishes don't look good, Lin Ran chuckled, picked up his chopsticks, and put a piece of meat into his mouth. Then, he silently spat it out on the ground. We're not here to eat. Let's get down to business. Yes, yes, yes. Let's get down to business. Zhou Hao nodded and waved his hand. Immediately, two elders stood up and shouted, "Arise." Then, they carried the table and ran out. There were only chairs left in the huge dining room. Lin Ran pinched his thigh to hold back his laughter as he took out a bamboo slip. This technique is called sword flight. Only senior martial masters can cultivate it. However, after mastering it, you can travel 800 miles a day on the sword. Sect Master Zhou, make sure your disciples can master it as soon as possible. Zhou Hao hurriedly knelt on the ground when he heard that. Sword God. I'm already grateful that you gave me this chance. I can't take anything from you anymore. It's fine. This is also to let them serve the Heavenly Saint dynasty better. Lin Ran chuckled and said, although you're going to the battlefield, you're not enlisted soldiers after all, so the Heavenly Saint dynasty won't provide you with anything. This sect will be your future base. This place is very far from the border. With this technique, you can rush to the battlefield as soon as the battle starts. Otherwise, what's the use of having you? Zhou Hao kowtowed respectfully and took the bamboo slip with both hands. From today onwards, you are a special force of the Heavenly Saint dynasty. Lin Ran stood up and said in a deep voice, all of you have to cultivate on Tianjue Peak. If the war starts, you have to rush to the battlefield immediately. Don't delay for no reason. Sword God, don't worry. Zhou Hao replied in a deep voice. He raised the bamboo slip with both hands as if he was holding an imperial edict. The sinners of Tianjue Peak will do their best to serve His Majesty. Good. I should get going now. As soon as Lin Ran finished speaking, he flashed out of the door. Caught off guard, Hua Qiyun got up and chased after him until he reached the entrance of the mountain. Only then did he see Lin Ran by the roadside. What's wrong with you? Why are you running so fast? Hua Qiyun glared at Lin Ran. He was completely unprepared just now. He suddenly activated his internal energy and sped up, almost causing internal injuries. Lin Ran held his stomach helplessly. Do you think I want to? I've been out for a day and I'm already starving. If I don't leave now, how can I go on impersonating when my stomach rumbles? As if afraid that Hua Qiyun wouldn't believe him, Lin Ran's stomach rumbled. Seeing this, Hua Qiyun could not say anything else. He looked around to determine the direction and suggested, this place is not far from the palace. If we move faster, we might be able to make it in time for dinner. It's too late. Lin Ran waved his hand and picked a fruit from the tree beside him. He took a bite and said, "We have to rush to the next sect that participated in the rebellion as soon as possible." Hua Qiyun frowned slightly. "Although time is tight, it's not that tight, right? Didn't you say that I can only wear this mask for 3 days?" Lin Ran finished one fruit in a few bites and picked another one. His eyes flashed cunningly in the darkness. "I just thought of a brilliant plan.